Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us to the International Workshop on Environment, Sustainability, and Education. My name is Oren Pizboni-Levi, and today I'm actually sharing the same room with my colleague Daphne Gan. For the first time, we are sitting in the same room, hosting this workshop. This is season 4, meeting number 3. And we're very excited to see so many people joining us this afternoon. Without spending more time, I would like to introduce our speaker, Giulia Tasquier, who is going to speak with us about embedding a transformative dimension in teaching and learning climate change. Giulia will speak for 20 minutes, and then we'll have some activity and some discussion. And we are all thankful and excited to have you joining us today. The floor is yours, Giulia. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And thank you especially for this invitation. I'm very happy to be here. So I will share my presentation. Let me know if you see it. Okay. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night to everyone. Where you are connected around the world right now. My name is Giulia Tasquier, and I'm a researcher at the University of Bologna in Italy. And this presentation is part of a work done especially within a project. I will talk about it later, together with Eric Knein and Alfredo Giornet from the University of Oslo. Let me spend just 1 minute to introduce myself and positioning also with respect to my research expertise. I'm a senior assistant professor in physics education at the Department of Physics and Astronomy of the University of Bologna. And I got a bachelor in physics and a master's degree in physics education in Bologna. So my background and my also daily academic life take place within a physics department. However, I carried out a PhD in science education at University of Palermo, always in Italy. And from that moment, I started to deal with climate change education. So I live like a boundary person within a physics department dealing with something that is related to education. And since the beginning of my career, my research was grounded mainly into European projects. And actually, I'm a coordinator of one of these projects about climate change and urgency, which is a national project. And I'm also the coordinator of what we call Open Schooling Network. That is a network that was born into European project and is made especially of teachers, because within our tradition in Bologna, we have a strong collaboration between researchers and teachers that work in schools. And my story as a researcher was born within ESERA, the European Science Education Research Association. I attended the ESERA Summer School for PhD in 2012, and now I'm a member of the ESERA Executive Board. So this is a picture of my research group in Bologna. It staying within the physics department, and in particular is related to the physics education and histories of physics curriculum of a master degree. But we have a long research tradition of working more into an interdisciplinary way within STEM, but also with the philosophy department, education, sociologists, and so on. So with the area of humanities. So, and my research expertise is within this big field of science education that takes together those keywords that I mentioned, starting from physics education and going toward social scientific issue, and also to also a field of research that is called future-oriented science education that I will mention. So it lives within this most interdisciplinary area. So starting to talk about the work that I would like to share with you today, I would like to start from a kind of phenomena, a social phenomenon that we are observing today. And that for us was a starting point, not only from a research point of view, but also collecting needs and perception that come directly from teachers and the school with we are working. So we are immersed in a period that is a period of profound changes. And we are living what sociologists call the society of uncertainty and acceleration. And we are constantly living in this personal perception of being in a too much change into a too short period of time. This is a sociological construction that was born several decades ago and was identified by Toffler and Tofflers like a future shock, and that today is conceived like the idea that the future is becoming always more and more difficult to be imagined, and that a frantic present is completely oriented toward the sizing of the moment. And as an Italian sociologist say, the present is becoming like a dust of moving splinter. So in this scenario, the past and the memory are fading and are not playing a role of building the interpretative representation of the present. And so therefore the changes we are experiencing can be considered epochal changes. And as this Icelandic writer that is Andri Magnusson wrote in his wonderful book that is called On Time and Water, we are facing with changes that are much greater than what our mind is used to, and more challenging than any of our previous experiences we have. So changes are deeply we are into this moment of change, and changes are deeply ask us also to rethink our roles in many ways. And within these epochal changes, absolutely, we can say that the manifestation of the urgencies of the climate crisis is anytime more and more evident in front of our eyes. If we go back to the release of the last IPCC report in 2021, the UN General Secretary referred to climate change as a code red for humanity. And the year later, with the second working group report, the IPCC chair said that climate change is a grave and mounting threat to our well-being and as a planet. So those claims come directly from science, but only very recently with this report, and especially with the release of the last one, the Fuji3 group report, science start also diverse use of the language and the vocabulary. So scientists started also to call for actions and to reaction. So there was also a deep change into the kind of language used by science. So we are therefore really facing changes of epochal significance from many perspectives. But the question is how, as the humans, to what extent the world are reacting, and how the humans are reacting in face of all of this. So we are claimed to act and to be convinced that action and reaction are needed and can be effective. Just taking this post-face of Bruno Latour to this book, he said that the great advantage of being faced with the Anthropocene is that we have no longer to deal with a natural problem. but we are faced with a social decision that we can easily oppose. So the other phase of the Anthropocene is that we are causing the problem, but we can also accept the challenge to, in some way, oppose the problem. And in terms of this, a very evident global reaction that resonated at a large level and was probably not expected was the global emergence in 2018 of youth movement. So the global emergence of these movement showed the extent to which young people feel engaged with complex scientific issues that represent real threats to their present and their future. And we can say that there are several messages that can grasp from these. One is that if the young go to the square, probably there is a lack in the school system that is not functioning and really responding within the school tradition and the school debate to a real question to a core question that is posing to the society. And another message is that this movement put an emphasis on the Anthropocene as potential in terms of the fact that future is a choice. And in this sense, the youth movements and the greater movements interpreted the phenomena of this time, realizing that there is an urgent need to give an answer and to do immediately to make sure that this answer has to be also transformative. So the strong claim of young generation is future is a choice. But this is not a novelty, because this is a voice that if we go back, not to the last report of IPCC, but for example, to the report 5, and those are data that come from the report launched in 2014, and the IPCC and the scientists said that the future is a choice, and introducing or not a drastic changes of direction and mitigation policies can substantially and profoundly change the kind of scenarios in which we are going to live. And this is also something that is coming from the field of research, a field of research that is called future studies, and that turn the idea of a future as a funnel, so as something that is just forecast and decide with one direction, to the idea of a future as a cone of possibilities. I will say something about this model a bit later. So in 2019, the European Parliament recognized officially with this report that education is one of the most effective tools against climate change. So the question is, to what extent educational systems are reacting to all of this? And despite the growing attention from many corners that we are looking at, science at school still seems to fail in being supporting for the young and for the student, making sense of this demanding social scientific question. If we'll take a look at this report that was launched a couple of years ago, there is this data about the fact that almost half of national curricula all over the world don't refer explicitly to climate change issue. So this is representative of the kind of delay that the formal education has with respect to the societal challenges that are more quick with respect to the change within the educational system and the system in general. However, this attention, this few attention that we can see into the curricula clashes against directions that are also designed by latest reports that talk about education, which keep pushing the idea that dealing with threatening challenges that characterize our era requires the development of knowledge and skills to navigate uncertainty and complexity of science as part of everyday life. So, as science educators, we are really challenged in this time by the quest of making science education relevant also within school science in the current context of crisis, as well as into the institutional context. And the question that I try to address from this perspective of science education research is that how can we support school students to critically engage with scientific knowledge and expertise, not only to foster decision making, but also to imagine the futures and to become agents of transformative change as current complex societal challenge require. And this is an answer, the answer that we try to give from our research point of view from a design-based perspective in science education research that was a longitudinal study started in 2013, and we are still carrying on also across several projects. And the idea is that we started to work by manipulating the disciplines and trying to work on the epistemological structure of science and mainly physics, because is our reality, is my today reality, just to try to find into the epistemological structure of physics how to embed the future dimension, so how to teach about the future and how to embed a transformative dimension, how to foster and to leveraging the change into the teaching learning of science. So this is a long path. I will focus mainly on the last part, but I would like to just give a small look, even if it's not the focus, on this first part that is most related to the dimension of the future. And the idea, because the whole path ground of this first reasoning. And the idea was to start to look into the epistemological structure of science, as I said, and in this case mainly physics, by thinking that within the profound causal structure of science, there are many possibilities to interpret the dynamics, the complex dynamics of the problem that we are challenging, and that the future is embedded into the epistemological structure of science. We have the habit at school, for example, in physics classics, that teaching insists on causal models that are built, for example, on Newtonian physics, that historically provide the models, the language, and also the epistemological scaffolding to imagine the future into a deterministic way. So the future is something that is a linear progress toward a better and better world that we can forecast. Science, however, throughout its history also, especially the modern science, has developed also temporal patterns and models of causal explanation until, for example, probabilistic models of quantum physics and also models of physics of complex system, which embed also other kind of thinking by referring, for example, to circular causality instead of linear causality, and feedback and loop effect, so projection instead of deterministic prediction, and space of possibility and building on future scenarios. And this is something that goes in parallel with these studies within the humanistic field of the future studies, where the cone of futures is built by thinking that the future can be organized into three ways of thinking. Thinking about probable scenarios that are the most expected one, and that are built by looking at the past and interpreting the current trends. And then there are the plausible and alternative scenarios that could happen if we question hypotheses and rules. If, for example, we take the risks and we have, for example, some wild card that can make exit from the mega trend. We can think that, for example, the COVID pandemic was something like this. And within the plausible scenarios, if we enlarge a bit the cone, we have all the possible scenarios, where there are also the preferable and the desirable scenarios, what are called within this study the visionary and aspirational future. So the ones to which we can aspire, and for example, indeed of make a forecast and a foresight, we can just fix this desirable scenario and think about backcasting and going back for orienting the action in the present in order to make those leveraging points of white card, if we want to call them in this way, that can orient the future into the different possibilities. So we use these paradigms and these models to rethink the structure of science and to reconstruct scientific knowledge in order to exploit the epistemological structure of science for elaborating future thinking and integrating the future thinking into science. So for us, it was an operation based on making design principle able to turn these into scientific activities, scientific tools, scientific models, and also approaches to revisiting science. And for example, we have things that goes from scenarios based on a climatological model, but also to analysis of text problem from a linguistical point of view to see the feedback loop into the way in which science is told, so narrative of science, and also to solve, for example, problems like city problem to imagine desirable future. So I just leave some paper about results about the way in which we addressed these issues. So grounded of this background, we had a kind of a second revolution by trying to imagine if we can also embed a transformative dimension, so to reason how also to trigger a societal change and to leverage a change into this grounding into science. And this study was framed within the Horizon 2020 project called SEAS, whose overall aim was promoting scientific literacy and the skill necessary to address complex sustainability challenges by embedding this transformative dimension into scientific literacy. And the idea at the core of the project was to relate scientific literacy to this model of transformation. So from the perspective of scientific literacy, the project builds upon the fact that developing scientific literacy useful for 21st century learning context involves not only the acquisition of scientific knowledge and argumentation, but also to leverage this on transformational action in real context. And the idea was to connect scientific literacy and science learning through a model of change that was that come from the Karen O'Brien, that was a human geographer. And the idea was to incorporate the transformative dimension into scientific literacy by referring to this heuristic model of the three spheres of transformation that define transformation as a process taking place across three interacting spheres. One is the practical sphere that is linked to the behavior. The other one is the political sphere that is linked to the institutional and systemic aspect. And the third one is the personal sphere that is linked to values and worldview. And if we think to open the three spheres, we think that, for example, the practical sphere that is mostly related to behavior is a sphere that can easily leverage a change, but where the change is, for example, a bit less deep. And then the change into the political sphere that is so cognitive as a change into the system is something that to be leveraged is it requires more effort, but so it's not so easy, but the change can be more deep. And then that the change in the personal sphere required a very strong effort to be leveraged, but is a change that is more deep. So the idea is that change can happen starting from different entry point, but the important thing is the kind of individual collective dynamic that is generated by the dynamical relationship between these three spheres. By recognizing the acting role that individual can have for producing a collective phenomena and changing the system and the mindset, and recognize that the system can have properties that can influence also the agent and the individual behaviors. So, which was our research response? We started from the kind of model that I presented before, try to embed here also a transformative dimension into the teaching of science. So into the complex path of teaching science in an interdisciplinary way, looking at the epistemological structure of science and taking complexity as a metaphor and also reasoning in terms of future as a con, we try to start and to use the metaphor of complex system also to try to put into practice this complex dynamic between individual and collective. And so we develop some tools that were able to have different entry point of individual or on the collectivities, but with the idea of making this dynamic between and collective and taking together the transformative dimension. So we used 4 tools, and one was the C challenge tools that as an entry point from the individual dimension, and that was represented by a challenge took by individual students that in 30 days start from changing something in their habits, so it lays into the practical spheres, and then with a series of ripple effect, try to amplify the behavioral change and just to produce some ripple effect into the family, into the classroom, into the small society where they are living, but starting from the individual part. And then we use this climate negotiation simulation. This was a negotiation, this was a simulator built from IPCC that was about collective decision and that simulate what happens usually in a COP, and where they simulated to be the people responsible for the choice for countries and group of countries, and they have to take choice for arriving to have scenarios that can take the global temperature within the 2-degree like of the Paris Agreement. So they realized in this dynamic that there were really complex things for choosing about the kind of things that the countries can do in terms of choice within the countries, but what they can do for facilitate, for example, choices of other countries that are important for the global mechanism. And then we use another tools that start from individual And this was a change game, was a video game, and that was a dynamical tools, starting from they had to create a city on a world, and they have to act daily for making choice for growing up in the city. And here the dimensions were more than scientific dimensions, so there was also the happiness of the people and the level of richness, so they touch upon several dimensions. And then there was this issue that any choice has to interact with the cities of the other, and then what they think a choice can generate can be amplified or not in terms of interrelation with the choices of the other city. So this goes really to the collective thing, and also the idea that any choice is also something that is irreversible. And like in any complex system, and then there are new entry points and new starting points for making choice that can be diverse for leveraging the change in the different scenarios that they want to have. So talking about scenarios, the fourth was from collective to individual, because we started from the shared socioeconomic pathways of IPCC, so from scenarios point, and just we tried to reasons about these different scenarios, try to grasping and to go back to the individual challenge for also adaptation and mitigation. And those are 5 narrative scenarios, so very diverse, for example, from the representative concentration pathways of IPCC that work on the data. Those scenarios work on the narratives, so on the kind of world that we can imagine with the data that we have. And so we ask the students to come back and to analyze the narratives in terms of individual action and individual behavior. So our research response was in terms of redesigning science, entering in its epistemological complex structure to embed the future and also embed a transformational dimension. So that was the kind of longitudinal path that we did by working on design principle and the manipulation of science in this way that was an integrate way of working on science with a more also humanistic dimension. How did this module impact? This is the paper that I suggest to read, where I reported also the analysis of one of the study that we carried out. This is, as I say, the longitudinal work, so we have several things to analyze. And in this study, even if we had several iterations, we started from this, is focused on this research with where we used these tools, especially the C challenge, and where we asked the student to fill some questionnaire, but we followed what we called the narrative of change. So the kind of the change into the daily life of the student, because they wrote a blog post, they used some boards for writing thought, they audio records conversation. So we had some data that belongs to questionnaires or interviews and activities that they produce, but there were also data that belong to the process and to their narrative of change. So those data were very complex and were, however, analyzed from a perspective of qualitative analysis. So just to put an excerpt of some findings.
Giulia?
Yeah?
No, this is not good.
Yes?
Sorry. We have like 2-3 more minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I would just like to show some sentences and then to give the floor for the questions and the work in the breakout rooms. Is it okay?
Yes.
Okay. So, for example, we would like to investigate in this study to what extent the use of the tools that I presented before influence a transformative change and activate some agency. So those are sentences that belongs to the student referring to the different model. So concerning the first point, we have the main spread feeling of the student was about the fact that they couldn't imagine the importance of overcoming a polarized vision of the world where the responsibility of creating and thence solve the climate change problem could live in a positive tension between individuals and collective, where in playing the game, both are fundamental to determine the scenario we are building with today's decision. That was an important point of discussion that was raised. And another point was that thanks to the metaphor of complex science, the envision behind the use of the tools that they were able to ground in their scientific knowledge to understand the importance of positioning at a different scale, and that a challenge posed in a smaller scale can influence, for example, the configuration on a larger scale, like they did since they first started their practical individual experience within the sea challenge at the beginning of the course, and when at the end they have to simulate to take decision as a decision maker for a country. For example. So those are the kind of things that emerge, and also, for example, that there is a world of possibility that can be influenced by the today choice, and this happens, for example, analyzing the scenario. So the kind of conclusion that we can take from the impact of this was that, for example, for fostering what characterized this approach for fostering transformation for us was to keep anchored to the discipline and to keep together the model of transformation of the three spheres with the individual collective dynamic through complexity, and this was the tools of change game, for example, and use the model of transformation of the three spheres as a concrete way to unpack and to unfold agency into various dimensions, and also to keep together the risk-taking perspective normally associated to the language of climate change to a more narrative perspective where the interpersonal stories of each individual can be intertwined among them and shape the bigger collective narratives. So now I would stop maybe to share in the sense that what I would like to do is to give you the examples of some sentences and to ask to you how the change in the student narratives, in the student way of telling about climate change and what is happening can match against the model of the three spheres of transformation, but more in general, besides trying to
Giulia, maybe we can have some questions from the audience, and then we will go to the...
Okay.
Okay, so maybe you can stop share and we can take several questions. So if you have any question, please jump in. Yes, Maggie, please.
Thank you very much, Giulia. That's just so amazing to see it happening in a scientific setting. Those of us who teach every day, we see it happening every day where young people are working on this. But then when you try to, and moving in these directions, but then when you try to get funding to change projects like this, it's very difficult without the kind of science that you're doing. So thank you very much for that. I just have one quick question. Did the students, after the study, to the best of your knowledge, did they then take this agentic position, take up their agency, and actually engage in transformation of their classrooms or schools or communities?
Okay, so the main reaction from the student was that they really wanted to play the complex game. And even if we usually start from the point that we have to simplify and to reduce, but reduction sometimes take off the meaning of the things that they do. So the idea of complexify to them give the added value of for what reason they learn science also. That was one point that was difficult usually at school, and this was stressed also by the teachers. In terms of agency, and what we can notice, because we can do only this, was the change in their personal micro narratives. So that was the main point. So I cannot say that we can follow a real change into the behavior, thinking that behavior as a longitudinal aspect in life. Because the C challenge was a 30 days challenge, and maybe they follow up with this, and that's okay. But what we notice was the change into the personal micro narratives, and in the way they perceived the future, that usually was in absence of hope. And here there was the potentiality to see that there is a space for agency. That was the main point.
And hope is based in agency.
Exactly.
So, thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. More questions? So I will ask a question. How did the other teacher in the school or that were not in the program accept your program? Because it's not a regular way of studying physics, and I wonder how open they were.
Yeah, in a difficult way on one sense, but on the other sense. We were lucky because in Italy in September 2020 there was a reform from the Ministry of Education that asked the school to address civic education by introducing also sustainability per 33 hours per year from primary school to we have 13 grades, so to grade 13, and to do this into a interdisciplinary way, and each discipline has to talk about civic education. So in the school they were completely lost because they usually don't do anything together and into the interdisciplinary way. We started this project just a few months before, so in this sense the answer was hard, but there was a need also into the schools. So working within the open schooling networks, we answered the need of the teachers that they have to reinvent themselves to communicate with others and to introduce sustainability. So this was something that came from the top down, and then we work bottom up with them, just try to see, you have this need. We can work together just to try to understand. We have our research hypotheses, okay, and studies, but we can try to work together. And so what worked for us was work within this idea of open schooling networks. There was really a co-sharing space not only a co-design and co-teaching, but also a co-sharing space that we had our research interest. They had their interest from the school, and then there were many interests. But working together also with different interests, but with common aims and values, helped a lot in working together, not without frustration, absolutely. That's part of the process. But the dynamic of the complexity was for us not only a design principle, not only a scientific entry point, but was a real life point and a way of working. So those are long process. And for example, if we want to answer to a something quick, those kind of things, we notice that they didn't work, for example. They can be enacted in long and longitudinal processes. That's the limit of this way of working, for example.
Great, thank you. Very, very interesting. More questions? Yeah.
Hello?
Thank you, Giulia, so much. Just a second, we have some. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes?
Okay, thank you. Giulia, can you go back to your slides with the possible and probable scenarios?
Yes.
I found that slide to be very interesting as I saw something similar in climate projections. Can you help us with unpacking it a little bit? What's the difference between the plausible and the possible?
Okay. And the plausible are those kind of scenarios that have a probability to happen that stay between 0 and 1 and that can happen if they are not the most probable into the mega trends. And that can include also some leverage points that can be exaggerated, for example, by amplification of feedback effects. However, within the possible, there are all the scenarios, also the one that are with the probability to be enacted that is close to 0. In this sense, we can introduce the desirable scenarios at the border between the plausible and the possible, where sometimes the desirable scenarios are the ones that are put there for aspirational aspect, and that can help to reason in a way that can orient to think not linear. But in thinking about the desirable scenarios, we can make a game of fixing them as a probability like 1, and then so think that they can happen, and then orient the past and the present in this sense, orient the present in this way. And so they can, for example, orient to turning from thinking in terms of megatrends to thinking in terms of what is less probable to happen. That, however, can be plausible.
Can I ask one more follow-up question about this? Have you presented this kind of a slide to teachers, for example, or to kids?
Yes.
And if so, what was their response, their emotional or affective response to this? Is this something that they found helpful or encouraging, or is that something that make them even more angry about the inaction of government, for example?
Okay, in terms of teacher, for example, this is a slide that this is not my design. This is the design of these two teachers that work into a school and that planned a teacher training course. They are the two leaders, but there are other teachers that were working that involved this teacher training course that have an impact also on the classes with the student. And so they design by following the con of the future, trying to work with all the teachers with different disciplines. So for the teachers, this was very inspirational. In terms of students, the idea to moving from the funnel to the cone as a different level of reactions. In sometimes the idea that they can open up the cone, it's something that give them a way to put the future not really attached to the present. Because we observed that usually when we ask the student to think about the future is just like an extension of the present. And then thinking about the con, there is this open up that the future is a future and is not a present. But in terms of reaction, however, it remains the idea of polarization about the fact that the future can be perceived both as dystopic and then utopic. Mm-hmm. So this kind of polarization in some way remains. So what happens is that the future take a breath. So it can be not only necessarily an extension of the present, but the dystopic attitude and the utopic attitude still remain in the discourse.
Thank you so much.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Tasquier. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. I really enjoyed it, even though I joined a bit later. I had problems with my Zoom connection.
Yeah, we can't hear you very well, Anastasia. We can't hear you very well. Maybe you can write your question.
Okay.
Is there more questions until Anastasia will write her question?
Yeah, there is one study that we did that was about studying the kind of future scaffolding skills that were developed by this approach. What we see that this approach helped to develop what we call the future scaffolding skills, that are skills that we divided into aspects. One is the structural aspect. So hierarchy of information, causal relationship, logic relationship, and so on to try to build the structure of the knowledge. And then there were also dynamical skills that help to create the movement in the structure. And for example, one of the skills is to talk in terms of possibilities instead of only constraints, and in terms to talk in terms of collective aspect instead of talking in terms only of individuals and so on. So there was this enabling of and this building of future scaffolding skills that was not an aware probably reaction to talking about the future, but just to have different skills of thinking about the kind of scaffolding that help to push imagination forward.
Thank you. Yes, Valerie, please.
There was.
Hi, and thank you all. This is a question maybe for everyone, so maybe more for the breakout. I wonder about rural versus urban, if people have seen distinctions in the way that children are thinking, in terms of that sort of diversity and what place-based education means in terms of the possibilities and their sense of agency, whether they're coming from the countryside or the city.
Okay, and we didn't analyze this in terms of difference between urban and countryside, but there was something that we noticed. So it was not systematic, but there was something that we noticed, that urban student and also student who lives on the coast are more hopeless. With respect to the countryside, the student, where the effect of being hopeless is less amplified. And in terms of novelties and constraints, the student of countryside were more welcoming with respect to this kind of approach. And that was also because the sense of performance of the schools who are in the countryside, this is probably typical of our country, is more light. Indeed, into the schools were in the urban centers, so they were more performative school. There was difficult also to convince the parents to have this kind of approach. And for example, in that school that I showed, the parents asked for a colloquium with the teachers, asking why they were doing this kind of thing. So talking about values, talking about hope and future, instead of doing strong science. So there was this kind of reaction. So we didn't do a systemic analysis of that, but I remember very well teachers talking about this phenomenon.
Thank you very much. So I think we are ready for the breakout rooms. And maybe now, Giulia, you can explain the exercise that you want us to discuss and to try.
Yes. So I selected 3 exemplary sentences that came from the students' narrative way of thinking about how they experience the use of these tools. And those are into a Google Drive document that was kindly prepared by Oren and Daphna. And in this Google Drive, you can find the model of the 3 spheres of transformation that we used to analyze the data. And you can find a couple of questions. And my interest is to see if this model can be inspirational for you to read the word and the narratives of the students. So this is the first point. But more in general, if you think to what extent this model can interpret student agency and how agency can be unpacked. So that was the point. So just to give some, just to start to reflect about this unpacking agency that can be an important point to discuss as a follow-up.
Great. So we are now going to have like 15 minutes of discussion in breakout rooms. And you have in the chat the link to the docs, then you can look at the model and the questions and the sentences that Giulia offers for us. And we will meet back in 15 minutes, and then each group will tell us a little bit about the conversation.
And Daphna, Orange, should I enter into a room? Okay,
Yeah,
Please.
yeah.
thank you.
Great. This is the only thing, this is not the only, but one of the things that I like in Zoom, that when you call the people, everyone is back at the same time. So,
Back on time.
yeah, back on time and at the same time. So we would like to hear a little bit from group one. Who was in group one that can summarize and tell us a little bit about your discussion?
Like Siri? Do you
Okay.
want to?
Yeah, no problem. We discussed about the students, their sentences and their response about after those education, and I found out that in the first, like in all of them, those students' responses are connecting to the practical and also personal. However, I did not notice they were connecting to political initially until Giulia explained that the development of the app, like Too Good to Go, is a product of a society and also of a collective work. So I understood it better, and also I was amazed to see like another group member in group one to has a strong feeling about Giulia's research, because since I did not work as a practitioner with students directly, but when I see like a practitioner and also a researcher had a connection about some certain things in research, it made me realize the close connection between practicum and the theory. So that's my takeaway from this discussion.
Thank you very much. Someone from group two can tell us about your discussion? Or someone
Hi.
from...
I was in group 2. Can you hear me?
No, we can't hear you well. No, not so well. Someone else from group 2.
Well, she made a heroic effort and spoke very slowly in our group. So we were like a very accommodating classroom, I would say, and it worked. And please others chime in. We talked about how actually it was weaving together, starting with the personal and then being able to bring in the scientific. You start with the expertise from the different subject areas, but in the examples, how there was a strong sense of personal agency and even economic. Something like an app is something they can literally control on their phone and use and talk about. And then also the aspect, I think, especially for adolescents, community is really important. So if you can build community a little bit like around the vegetarianism and have that be a social connection, those are all the different ways, the nuances that embed learning. I think it'd make you want to absorb expertise rather than reject it, I hope.
Great, thank you. More comments? from the group discussion? More ideas? Be brave, my student. You can be brave and say something.
Maybe Giulia would like to say something.
Do you want to see my reading of the 3 sentences? Now, one interesting point was this discussion about the meaning of the political spheres. That was very critical, as also Cyril said, in terms of when we can identify a political dimension in terms of part of the agency dimension, because sometimes it seems to be external from the dynamic, and so it was, for example, we discussed about the fact that the political dimension, if we define this dimension as something that can focus, can identify structures that can facilitate both a constraint that a leveraging point to the practical response. So these include change as a collective and systemic action, like in the app, for example, but that can be leveraged something that is individual. So, but political is also a word that can be interpreted in many different ways. And so it can raise some, for example, problems to see that political include other aspects that are difficult to be entered in the game. There's a comment in the chat.
Yeah. Yes, there's a comment there. Yeah, students made informed decision, and informed decision is always political.
Yeah, in this sense, political is something that is structural, systemic, and that can facilitate maybe the effect on the behavioral and the practical aspect. So this is a wider way to define maybe political, the political dimension.
Okay, so Giulia, do you have something to add before we are closing the meeting? No. So if no one has comments, I can say that I think it's very inspirational, the idea to study in this way the science, the exact science, and I don't know, I hope in many places and in Israel they will adapt this approach. I'm not sure they will, but I can hope, because it seems very, very useful and powerful, and very different than what we used to do, at least in our educational system. So thank you, Giulia. Thank you very much.
Thank you to all of you for your time.
Thank you everyone for participating in our
Thank you.
workshop. And see you next time. It's in 3 weeks from now, 28th of February.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.